I think we should take a minute here just to really comprehend the severity of this mistake and the devastating effect this is going to have on your poker future if you keep this up. What's up guys, we're about to help Mark with his big blind play today, looking for his leaks in this crucial position. Before we get stuck into that, I want to give you a quick update from carrotcorner.com. We are launching our Black Friday sale tomorrow as I record this. That's Thursday the 24th of November at 12 PM UK time. You can get 25% off everything site-wide, no code necessary, by heading over to carrotcorner.com. So whether it's solved ranges you're looking for, or maybe you're ready to take the plunge and invest in your poker education with the Carrot Poker School, our highly acclaimed video course. You can get almost £250 off our full scholarship bundle. That's where you get grade 1, grade 2 and grade 3 of the Carrot Poker School all at once. There is no better time than now to invest in your poker education over at carrotcorner.com. Let's get into the video. Ladies and gents, boys and girls, the return of From Losing, Cruising. Mark, welcome back to the show. Has this week been more of a cruising week for you?
It sort of feels at this point that it's from losing to bumbling along and it's starting to tip along positively, so it does feel like we're past the halfway point of just flatlining, which is cool. So this week was a good week, just from a results point of view. It was good, but also from a confident playing, felt good at the tables and felt good since our session was 1 week ago today, and almost immediately after it cleaned the slate that of sort of emotional build-up that I had from the losing streak. So we did two, as you remember, we did 2 sessions last week, and the first one was 2 episodes ago was the downturn. So it was nice that just like I just came out of the session with just a clean mindset that everything was good. I got confidence from it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So
the sort of veils of obscurity that we can place over our own eyes during times of strife in poker, right?
Yeah, the results orientedness of it. It's very hard to combat that, especially when you're learning. You've so much to learn, and it's so easy to be hard on yourself and to just beat up on yourself that it's your fault. That's why you've lost 10 buy-ins. Because
we need to blame something, don't we, as humans? We usually need to blame something. We're not used to luck being such a big factor in how well we do, how well we fare. A lot of being a good poker player is learning like the technical aspects, the theory and the exploits being the 2 elements of that. But then the whole other side of the coin is emotional and mental maturity, not just in-game, but also throughout the journey between sessions, in the interim, between sessions, downswing management, that kind of thing. And I think part of your growth in this journey, and hopefully the audience can testify to this, is that you're not just growing technically, but you're also suffering less through downswings and getting back on the horse quicker, so to speak, and just being more mature about how you handle adversity as well. So that's great.
Yeah, and on the latter, there's a huge gulf between like conceptually understanding that the game has a lot of luck and actually dealing with being hit by the rough side of that coin and dealing with it properly, or as you should. It's a funny thing how it's I think it's your subconscious really not fully understanding it yet.
Or maybe just not being wired to ever fully understand it. Maybe your subconscious is just not supposed to accept environments that are that volatile because it's never been trained by evolution to cope in those environments. It's actually part of law and order and natural selection that there's only a certain amount of luck. And when that luck reaches a point that's higher than that amount, we enter this phase of like panic, freaking out, making the wrong assumptions. It's like a computer that's been fed the wrong inputs and then it's spitting out the wrong outputs. It's not calibrated properly for the inputs that poker actually gives you. So yeah, fascinating stuff. We could talk all day. Big blind battles today, in the sense that you had a look at some of your results and you sort of had the feeling that in the big blind your red line was maybe being hit more than it was. Obviously you're meant to be losing in the big blind and red line because you're like defending passively pre and then holding the flop more than the MDF break-even point for villains bluffs because you have a range disadvantage. So that's really normal. Like theoretically, people need to understand that first and foremost. But secondly, there's that, and then there's also like making it worse than it needs to be by folding too many hands, being too passive, not attacking enough, not using the right lines in the right situations, all that shit. So today we're going to get into that, guys. We're going to really look at Mark's big blind play, and we're going to start with Jack 4 of spades. So pretty good defend. You can 3-bet here, of course, but I wouldn't against this player. You're just it's gonna be a blunder, right? Even though it's like theoretically okay. it's going to be a blunder against this villain with the 24 big blinds. So flop actually goes check, check here. Yeah, it's a really generic common spot, but what's your thought process here?
My thought process is that I would expect as a weaker player to c-bet that flop pretty frequently. So when they don't, I think it condenses their range somewhat.
Yep.
So yeah, so I think I'm dealing with a condensed range, and I think I can bet or check here, I think.
So what does theory say that you should do here and why?
Theory says I think I need to probably check here.
Yeah. So it would be a prohibited bluff in game theory because we're in I use this word world a lot and I have to stress the O because I'm Scottish, so I say world if I'm not careful and people can't understand the word. So when the world is very disadvantageous for your range against your opponent's range, you can expect fold equity to not be at a premium. You can expect villain to be maybe even in position to be over defending compared to your break-even point mathematically for bluffing. Yeah. Which would be, say, 42% if you beat 75 tier. If you do that, then game theory is like, well, you're only getting 39% fold equity, and then like your bet's losing, so you just should never do that without a bit more equity here in a disadvantageous scenario like this for range. This is a good example of combining range thinking with hand thinking. What we don't want to do is like wake up here with 7-8 and be like, oh no, our range is suffering, so we have to check. Like, no, you just have to be more selective about what you bluff. It doesn't mean you can't bluff anything, but this hand you can't bluff. In the real world, I'm not convinced that, I don't really know that saying that villain is condensed here means that we're allowed to bet. Like, yes, they're condensed, they're meant to be condensed in theory. Actually, if we thought they had more air than normal, that would be a reason to bet here, maybe. But I don't know if we have that read. It sounds like you're just saying that they have a condensed range like they're meant to have, and I think you're getting a bit ahead of yourself with the exploit there. You've not actually said, I think there's more fold equity in reality than there's meant to be. If you believe that, then okay, maybe you can bet here for significantly more, but you didn't really say that, so I'm a bit unsure of where the exploit of like I can bet here has come from.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. It's probably not a bet.
Okay.
I would make.
So so as has been pointed out before, I think you do overuse like polar and condensed, and I think someone said this in the comments a few weeks ago. They said like Mark uses words like polar, linear, condensed as like a crutch when he doesn't know what to think, and I think I'd agree with that. I usually disagree horrifically with everything the chat or comment section ever says because they're always wrong, but in this occasion I think they were actually right. It must have been a non-baboon that left that message. Just kidding, guys. You know I love you in the comments. Do let us know what you think about this episode. Don't stop commenting because I insulted you. So yeah, we do want to just continue to check here unless we know the villain is very underprotected and fit or fold in this spot. I don't think we can go as far as to bet this hand. But then on the river, this is a very overfolded spot usually. So here, when they've checked twice, there is now too much air on most textures and you're meant to be kind of break even, right? Bluffing most hands in this spot in theory, so you probably can, if you don't hit the 4, go ahead and bet there, right? So that's an exploit where against fish after check, 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 you have more fold equity than you're meant to, and it's really important that you take this spot if you haven't hit the 4. I suspect you might not have taken it if you hadn't hit the 4, maybe you would have, but it's not a river blunder theorem spot, as we say in Carrot Poker School Grade 2 Lecture 2. It's not a spot where theory demands that you bluff everything that doesn't have showdown value, because fold equity is not that high, theoretically, but it's higher in practice on this node than it is in theory, and that's why you should be betting here if you have like Jack 3 or Jack 7 or something. Anything to add on that, or shall we move on?
No, I think that's all clear, and hopefully I'll surprise you in the next few hands.
Nice, I hope so. Okay, so I think betting, it depends firstly what sizing we're building on this flop. I think you can build a big bet or a small bet here, it's not that important. Which one do you build in spots like this on low boards?
On low boards, I would, in this spot, blind versus blind, I would probably pick a small bet.
And why?
Just because the ranges are so wide and there's so much air that I don't think it's necessary to build a big sizing.
So we're saying they're overfolding to the small bet? Is that an exploitative thought? Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Try and make it clear for me whether it's an exploitative thought or a theoretical one. Otherwise, my brain short circuits and explodes, and then I get confused. So I think that's the reasonable thing to say. You could also just say that on a board like this, if you bet big, it's going to be really overfolded. If you bet small at these stakes, it's also going to be really overfolded. I'm not sure which is more overfolded. I think they're both dramatically overfolded. And I don't have a big preference. And I think when you have a good hand here, you'll always do worse than you will if in equilibrium. And when you have a bad hand, you'll always do better. because you're getting more fold equity than you were meant to get. So actually the EV of ace 8 is going to go down here a little bit, even though it's a great hand, because villain's probably folding to your bet like too often. Checking back with this hand, I think, is a deviation. I think top pair, top kicker with the backdoor flush draw is a mandatory bet in position on the flop, urgency-wise, protection-wise. I don't hate the check, but this is one that I would usually revert to betting, though I don't feel half as strongly about it as like most of the audience watching this do, who are just like programmed to ritualistically bet this hand in this spot. Again, like, not everyone will be thinking that, but I think people think this is more of a theoretical bet than it is. It is a theoretical bet, but it won't be like a huge EV swing. Villain checks, so you have a good hand. Is it a optional, mandatory, or prohibited value bet at this point?
I think it's optional.
Yeah, probably. And again, I would err towards making it, just because I think that people aren't checking enough jack here. So if you imagine that in game theory terms, the value bet on the turn is like high frequency, it's borderline mandatory, but it's probably just optional. When you start acknowledging that actually most of the jack X that the solver will be a snake in the grass with here and check is gone from the pool's real range, then in terms of true EV, I think betting is better than checking, because the equity of this hand is now going to catapult upwards to, I don't know, 79, 81, something like this percent, when it's only meant to be 70 or something. So I can see this becoming mandatory in reality. So when you check here, I feel like you're not really adapting to the fact that villain's range is just weaker than it should be, and you should just be going for two streets here and just rushing those two streets to value now. He's not going to have 9s, 10s, jack X, pocket aces, a check raise anywhere near enough here. And therefore, with a fairly vulnerable, monstrously high equity hand, I think you can just bet.
Yeah.
So what's going on in game there? Like, first off, do you agree with my diagnosis when I say you have a lazy tendency to check a lot of hands in a lot of spots in smaller pots?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I think this is a leak. I think it's sometimes sort of tricky trappy against certain type of players, this player is a aggro tag type, and I just expected that he might be taking some hands, and I might make EV from bluffs here.
One thing that you should maybe consider if he's a really aggro player is that hasn't an aggro player very often bluffed either on flop or turn. I think when you have someone that's really aggro and they've not bluffed by now on a texture that's quite good for them, it's more likely that you're actually looking at a condensed range here than an air heavy one. So be careful. That's hand reading. Yep, it's actually like taking a player read and not just stopping at the brute force player read, but just taking it that bit further and seeing what it really means to their application of their range in this situation and what you should do about it. And very easy call. Yeah, not much to say. That's absolutely horrific baboon-like play by villain on the river here, because like villain still has some showdown and you're not really folding much. This is just a really, really, really awful play. Let's put villain 3 in the shame bin. Shame bin! Anyways, back to the action here. So yeah, you have been a bit placid there. I think the hand reading has been a little bit too vague, basically. Boom. And boom. Okay. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that this is a bit bigger, right, than normal. But is villain 6 a recreational player?
Villain 6 was tight at this point. Was 19.
But there's only 27 hands on him in my HUD. I don't know if it's different for you.
Same
So it's actually, so I don't want us to call this a tight player. I think this is another leak you have.
Yeah.
And it's about HUD identification. I know YouTube, you guys can't see the HUD here, but basically I have a very cavemanish, simple HUD that just has VPIP and PFR on, just so I can vaguely player type. And I want to avoid all the other stats and not get bogged down on them, right? Like over small samples. 1919 means absolutely nothing. Absolutely zilch. We cannot start referring to people who have been 1919 over 27 hands as tight, because then we're just calling random unknowns tight.
Yeah.
That's essentially
tight so far, I think is...
Tight so far is even just like unnecessary, because there's no so far yet. It's too early for there to be a so far. Okay, let's say he's unlikely to be a whale. I'm okay with that. He's unlikely to be like a really loose fish, but we don't know how he could be a passive fish, but it's more likely he's some kind of regular or something. He's unlikely to be like a 60/3 player, sure. But he could be like a 24/9 or something. We don't know yet. It's possible. So anyway, we fold, and I think that's fine against like most people here, but as soon as someone is range betting, so if this was third pot and you have to read that they're range betting, this fold is really bad. Because raise is going to print money, even with a gut shot with no heart here. This is going to be close in equilibrium, like probably it's a mix of call and fold or something. But here I don't mind actually just pitching it if the half pot is a bit unusual, because when people split their range, it's too strong. And when they don't split their range, they're overfolding to raise. So If somebody uses a big c-bet at these stakes and they're splitting up their c-bet range, they're probably going to be too strong. They're not going to have enough low equity bluffs. They're going to have too many high equity bluffs and value hands. Whereas if they bet smaller, they're probably range betting and then they're overfolding to raise. So you should have two very different stark strategies against either small bets or big bets respectively, right? For those reasons. 4. Call is good. Call is good. So I'd be betting really often here. I think you just have not enough showdown value to check with a bad king high in this spot. The clue is that you filtered your range, yeah? You've called the flop and therefore your range has become stronger and you should bet really often. And I think this is pretty good, yeah? Villain calls and this is a GTO give up. You don't have the part of your range that's meant to follow through with the king of hearts here. So pretty easy check, especially on the 7, which is like, yeah, easy check here. I like it. I like that hand. So call flop c-bet here. Call turn c-bet here. What's happened here? Okay, first question. Are you okay? Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Sure?
Yeah.
Were you okay when you played this?
Yeah, it was fine, yeah.
This is very surprising to me, this line. I don't understand it. I don't understand what you're doing. So I want to hear why we disagree so strongly here.
Just go back in the action there.
Go back in my chair again towards the door.
No.
So flop c-bet, we call. Turn 7, he bets again, we call. River check. I want to hear your thought process now as if you have a fresh start at this hand. So I want to hear you like try and nail this. You don't even need to think that exploitatively. I think just would love to hear like the theory.
Polarized, so when he gives up, this is the air side of his range. So to bluff, I don't need to bet very big. To fold out a lot of those hands that were barreling.
But you have top pair
and then giving up.
You have a pair. Why would you need to fold out any of them?
Sorry, yeah. He's going to call me with. Well, am I losing very often with this bet? Am I getting called? Is the question. If I am getting called, am I?
Yes, you're getting called by like any slow play, and probably getting called by like ace jack, king jack, hands like that sometimes as well. My problem with this bet is I have no idea what it's trying to achieve. I don't understand what it even is. I don't think it's a value bet, and I don't think it's a bluff.
It was a value bet, right? But
right. Okay. Okay. So it's far too thin, because when your opponent polarizes twice, they actually don't have a made hand worse than Jack 9. So there's not a single hand in their range here, apart from like 10-8 or something, that's worse than you that calls. If this had gone check, 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 check all the way to the river, then you can go ahead and make a big value bet with top pair. But you have to ask how you got there. You have to be super aware of like the action sequence that's led to this.
Yeah, and I know how I made the bet. I just looked at his stack, looked at the pot, and thought if he has... Yeah, I didn't think about his range being so polarized here, and how if he's going to call, I'm beaten.
You're not always beaten. Like, he might have rivered an 8. He might be a lunatic that just has like a 7 because he's a short stack and decides to call with it. So it's not that you always lose when called. That's too strong. Yeah. But you take the worst of it when called. Therefore, there's no reason to try to value bet here. Your equity on this river is high, but that is mostly, as you've rightly identified now, because you're just beating give-ups. That's why it's high.
So would you bet small, or would you not bet?
I wouldn't bet. I don't think you can bet top pair bad kicker having just called 2 large bets. I don't think there's many situations where you can do that, unless you have a read that villain, by betting twice, was basically just going to have their whole range and was going to be super merged and just completely... Obviously, like, a fish will be more merged than a regular will be, but unless you've got the read that, like, they're a complete lunatic, then they're probably just not going to have enough made hands that are weaker than yours that can call. They don't even have to call either. They can easily have, like, I don't know, Jack 6 here. If they did bet turn, they shouldn't bet turn with Jack 6, but if they have, they could fold it. They could fold an 8. They're certainly unlikely to fold a better Jack than this, and there's no reason why they can't have Jack 10, Queen Jack, King Jack. This bet is so far away from a value bet that you will actually make some better hands fold with this bet. Sometimes villain will fold like Queen Jack. Not often, but it's possible, and that's why it's certainly not a value bet. That doesn't make it a bluff either, because I think usually they won't fold Queen Jack. But I'm just showing you that, I'm just demoing that as like a sort of illustration of why it can't be a good value bet. Yeah, I get it. I did miss that he had a 24 big blind stack. I thought you just overbet into like a full stack or something, but even so, I think this is going to be too thin. I guess like the other thought I would take issue with there is the thought of, can this bet really like lose? Like, what can it cost me? Fish will just get spooked by 3 straights completing and just check queen jack, king jack, jack 10, ace jack, overpair, and they will do it not because they're going to check fold, but because they've been spooked away from betting, but then they're not folding either. Weaker players tend to have more check calls on the river here than regulars or solvers do in this situation. If you do this against the solver, it's a blunder, but it's less of a blunder because the solver's just folding so often that it basically doesn't matter. You just win, or you win by betting, or you win by checking. But actually against like a fish, there'll be more queens, more king jack, more of these hands that randomly got spooked and checked the river without much of a plan and then check call, and that's one of the issues with it. So I would say that we need the Wando stamp on this one. The reason I was so shocked though is that I thought you just overbet 30 big blinds like against the full stack when I did my whole recoiling thing.
I was wondering.
I mean,
I thought that wasn't warranted, so yeah, that's okay.
Well, I still think it is warranted, but we can politely agree to disagree on that.
You're just defending your action.
You're just defending your play. Remember that episode of
post factum?
Oh, big words. Big words, you win. Remember that episode of From Losing to Cruising where Pete and Mark famously fell out in the middle of the coaching session? That's this episode, guys. Nah, just kidding. We know each other well enough now. I think we can roll with the punches a bit. So king deuce of spades in the big blind here. Flop a flush, and it goes check check, and we have a turn leading dilemma. What's your thought process here?
After check check, I think we have a mandatory bet on the turn. I think villain checking behind on the flop is a condensing action. It's a reg, and I think that is a condensing action. So now we have a value hand, and any jack X that check behind on the flop is going to be put in a very difficult spot by a double barrel turn and river here with queen, with king.
So why is that good if he's in a difficult spot?
Well, I think he's not going to be able to fold, is what I mean. I think.
So you're basically just saying that if villain has a jack and you have this hand, you can value bet twice and make money.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's not even mention the difficult spot thing because it's misleading and it justifies the audience in their belief that the whole aim of poker is to make people suffer and not to actually make money. Making people suffer, as I've said many times, is the side bonus. I disagree that in theory this is mandatory. I think when you can check raise, you can always check for value. So villain is kind of condensing, but you are taking condensing and polarizing a bit too far sometimes. Like, yeah, he's condensing, but it's only mildly so. He still has air when he checks back this flop. He still has a bluffing range and he still has hands he can value bet here. If villain has a jack and you check, what do you think he's going to do with said jack?
He's going to bet it, yeah.
Yeah, so actually your thought process is kind of incomplete, if you see what I mean, because you're weighing up the fact that you can get value twice from a jack, but if it's actually the case that people don't slow play a jack enough here and they bet it all the time, which I totally think is true, then by check raising and then betting river, you actually make more money. So a bit of a half-cooked, I would say, thought process there. Try to compare the actions. Try to be a bit more procedural here with your thought process and start out by saying, is this mandatory in GTO? And then once you've answered that, you could say, do I have an exploitative deviation? So it's not mandatory in GTO, and the exploitative deviation, I think, is actually to check because a jack is, well, it might not be, but concerning a jack, the exploit is to check raise because the jack's not going to check back enough. That said, there are other hands here like eights with a spade that if you knew villain had it, you would rather bet. So against some of his range, you'd rather bet. Against some, you'd rather check raise. Those are your two options. I don't really know which is better. It'll be opponent dependent. This player looks like a classic reg to me on the HUD that I've got. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And I think regs will delayed c-bet a lot. So I quite like checking here. I think it's fine. I also think betting is fine. I don't think it's mandatory. And I think we should all move away from the idea that we have to bet here out of position. In position, sure. It's different, right? It's more urgent. Okay. And to understand that, guys, just remember, if you check here, villain can reopen the action on this street. You can check raise. That's why it's less urgent. In position, you check, you go to the river. So you're closer to the end of the hand and to a lack of pot growth. If we think this player is like really placid though, then this is going to be a full frequency play. And otherwise, I'm not sure that this is better than just checking. It might be kind of close or unclear. Okay, jack 5. Another spot where you can raise, but against a stack, you don't really want to. And I love this. I love just like stabbing all day against weaker players who check flops. It's in general going to be really lucrative in this spot. And I think the sizing is decent. Double gutter. Okay. So let's be a little bit careful here, because what I'd like you to do is assess, firstly, is this overbet a good thing in GTO? I think it's fine. I'll just answer that part. But in reality, are there any ostensible problems with this play?
Yeah, I could get jammed on and not thinking about that properly. Yeah, and get denied equity.
So that's quite a disastrous play, and the bigger you go, the more of stacks you bring into play here. the worse it is when the jam happens, because you're putting out more dead money to just sort of like lose. The good news is that it won't happen like super often, but I do think at this SBR, the other really important point here is, well, what is the reason that overbetting is fine here in theory at 100 big blind stack depth? What is it achieving that makes it a good idea, or at least like a viable plan in game theory?
In game theory, we're employing a polarized range against a condensed range. So his call on the flop is condensing, and therefore on the turn we have an equity disadvantage, but we have a nut advantage. So we can polarize.
Or we can use the large sizing to leverage a nut advantage. You're saying we basically have way more hands like straights here than he has. Although this is a semi-equalizing nut advantage turn card because he does check call some straight draws as well. Yes. But in reality, I think people don't do that. I think they bet them a lot. I think you're right that you do have a kind of nut advantage here. That justifies it to some extent, but it's not the function of it. That's more a prerequisite for being able to do it, right? Or pre-requirement for being able to do it. So what's the function of the overbet? Why do we do it? That's a different question than are the parameters met for doing it?
Yeah, we do. Sorry, with the value or with bluffs?
Let's say with value, because the bluffs are kind of not the drivers of the bus here. The value hands are kind of dictating
with value,
what goes on.
We do it to get paid, so we do it to get stacks in.
Okay, good. So we're bringing in
a pot aggressively to an investment ceiling.
Good.
That our hands warrant.
Excellent answer. So we're building the pot to an investment ceiling that's warranted by the strength of our hand. My argument here is that we don't have to go this big at this SBR to build the stacks to an investment ceiling where we can just shove the river easily and get stacks in. B75 is good, yeah. The normal gain of overbetting is actually eradicated by the stack depth, and with that happening simultaneously, this new danger of the jam becoming way more likely has come into the picture, because if you have 100 big blinds here and you have 10-9 as villain here, you're not raising this turn overbet. You're just calling and you're like, shit, I have like a bluff catcher now. If you have king-queen, you're not jamming just for the sake of it. But when you're a fish, and there's not much left, and your fight or flight instincts have just been triggered by a bigger bet, you are jamming 2-pair regularly. King-queen, pair plus draw, flush draw plus king. You're jamming all this stuff, and that is a travesty for Jack 5. So if you're going to bet this turn, and you don't have to, you could check, but if you're going to bet this turn, bet smaller. But I think with this level of hand, I would always check, and the reason is that it's a more advanced point, but you actually really unblock the jamming range, and you just have the kind of hand that gets devastated by a jam. So I'm probably checking here at this sort of danger zone SBR with this hand. You do get the fold, which is nice, but yeah, be a bit careful that you're not. I think it's your old habit of kind of blanket applying theory without looking at the specifics enough, without looking around at where you're at. All right, call big blind, ace queen 9. Easy call. I love going through this. It's like going through the natural habitat of your game. It's like watching an animal in its natural habitat, because we're just looking at all hands without filtering. This is like you going around and like grazing or hunting or building your den, thinking no one's watching. But we are watching, aren't we, YouTube? We're watching. Okay, so River, talk me through your sizing schema here for your range. What bet sizes exist and what ones don't, and what should this hand do?
On River, so the action was, let's not call, check. So his range is quite weak. I think I probably don't. Yeah, B75 is my bet sizing on this river, but I could get called by a 9.
You don't have to do that though. You don't have to start saying what hands are calling you. What you need to do is think about your equity, and that should dictate like what hands call you. If you start saying, if I B75 and get called by a 9, you're starting to go down into targeting territory, and we really hate that on this channel. Yeah. You guys know how we feel about targeting. The thing is, you don't know whether a 9 will sometimes bluff catch against an overbet. You don't know whether it will fold to B75. And we know that humans are underly elastic in general, according to mass data, not overly elastic in general. So that means that if you bet pot here, there's not as big a contraction in their range as there would be with a solver if you increase your sizing to pot against a solver compared with, say, B75. I'd say your hand is certainly good enough to overbet, like equity-wise. It can definitely do that. And that would be my main go-to with a hand this strong. I think overbetting here is just the norm. I don't hate B75, but when we have a hand with like 90% equity, overbet figures to be the highest EV play. One reason for that, in reality, is that villains should actually bluff raise your B75 sometimes, because he has rivered like a queen on occasion here, and probably won't ever bluff raise your B75, or close to never in reality at these stakes. So I do think that you should overbet here. I think this is a mandatory bet because you block some bluffs with this jack, and Yeah, I mean, you can maybe check raise a spot too, but I think it's mainly a bet. So I don't hate your sizing here, but these sorts of hands, and I don't want to target these sorts of hands because villain could bluff catch all kinds of things here. You could bluff catch a 4 or a 9 or kings or anything at all, or 8s. But we can't just draw a line in the sand and be like, do you know what? He's only calling B75. He won't call overbet. I don't know if that's why you're rejecting overbet, or maybe you're just not including it in your thought process yet, which is fine.
I wasn't including it on that. I do struggle a bit when I check turns. When turn check what my sizing is for...
Well, your sizing for value just correlates with your hand strength. So if you have a 90% equity hand, there's no problem with overbetting. It's that simple. You don't have to overcomplicate it any more than that. When you're bluffing, it requires a bit more imaginative sort of gymnastics where you have to think, I would have a queen here a lot. A queen with a good kicker like Queen Jack is a very strong hand and it can overbet. Whereas if I had a queen with a bad kicker, maybe that's a B75. So I don't mind the B75 at all. I'm not really opposed to it, but I'd like it if overbet entered your thoughts here with like the top of your range, because you do have a very high equity region here of Queen X, and villain, of course, is going to have a more condensed range that will call overbet sometimes, you know? So it's definitely fine to do that. So overall, I think it's just today's been like a kind of technical fixing session. The 9-7 here will make this our last hand, and then we'll wrap up next time on From Losing to Cruising. We have a special episode coming your way. Do check out episode number 14, which is actually going to be an interview with Mark. It's going to be a more personal take on his journey so far in life and in poker, what he's hoping to get out of his poker career, his inner trials and tribulations, hopes, dreams, fears, aspirations, everything you could think about. We're going to cover it next time on From Losing to Cruising. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you get notified about these videos. I think the audience will really love to hear that, and I'm looking forward to doing it. But for now, we have 7-9 of spades, and we call with a gutter, which is fine. One thing I want to say to you is, how is your flop raise game against pool? Because I've told you before, people range bet where they shouldn't, and they are very atrocious at these stakes at defending against raises. So how is your raise game? Are you doing it enough?
The answer is probably not. And what the reason is, I think I have a mental bar that I want to have, as well as something like a gut shot, I want to have overcards. And I think that's probably too high a bar for these type of examples where someone is range betting. I need to drop that requirement in my head, because that's what stops me. I look at this and I think if I had 9 Jack or something like that, I probably, with 2 diamonds, I'd probably be check raising here. And that's just a mental thing, and I don't know. It's like one of these rules that you learn at some point as a good idea, and I'm not. I really think all of the sentences that start with "if I had" are quite bad in poker. They're like kind of arbitrary comparisons. You know, if I had a backdoor straight draw, if I had a flush draw to go with it, if I had overcards. You know, it's if I had one wish, I'd wish for a big enough ass for the whole world to kiss. All of these statements, including the Eminem lyric that I just gave you, are not useful for poker because they are kind of arbitrary. They're comparing something to something that doesn't actually affect EV with this hand. So, for example, how good it is to raise with Queen Jack here with the Queen of Clubs has nothing to do with how good it is to raise 7-9 of spades. The bar is somewhere, and even in theory, I think this hand could raise, and I think in practice it's infinitely better because of the general sort of culture, the meta game that exists right now and probably always will. People just making baboon range bets and not knowing how to defend them. So yeah, we can attack here and be pretty happy. I'm not saying this call is a mistake per se, but raise is a very lucrative cash injection that you could be using, and this sort of thing is covered in one of the episodes of our upcoming course, Cash Injection, available December onwards. Check out carrotcorner.com. This sort of line is available to you as an exploit based on all of this culture that's currently going on. So I love raise here. I think it might actually be better than call. And it will propel you out of this stake. It will propel that graph upward. We'll see that red line go up. Stop putting yourself in a restrictive sort of straitjacket and like disabling your own sort of profitable movements here. You can liberate yourself, as you say, a bit more. Mandatory bluff, would you agree? River blunder theorem spot. You've called. He's checked back. If we don't bluff here, we're going to get blunder stamp on the screen. Christ on a bike. What was it doing?
Christ on a bike, chat. You heard it here first. Can we have the Jesus on a bike? No, it's too much.
Dreadful.
So I think a lot of this is just habitual and subconscious, and I think your subconscious brain is wrecking your win rate. Like, you can't win with this sort of thing. I think we should take a minute here just to really comprehend the severity of this mistake and the devastating effect this is going to have on your poker future if you keep this up. Would you agree with that assessment that it's mainly a subconscious kind of habit here and not so much you like thinking anything here? Or is there a culprit thought that makes you miss this mandatory bluff?
No, I don't think there is. I think that I certainly, before the last session we went, the last coaching session, I've been missing these all over the place. And I'm surprised that I did this after it being my focus for the week. I'm not surprised. I caught one more that I did, but I caught it immediately after. I had king something and they checked down ace something and I lost. I had king 4 and I kicked myself. I should have. These are the points where I need to be aggressing to fold out those hands. So yeah, I'm very surprised that
because in theory,
and this maybe was just I don't know. I have no excuse.
Yeah, I guess in theory, like the idea that we all need to understand here for the audience too is that it's not break even to bluff. It's very profitable to bluff. It's winning to bluff because the fold equity we're getting is more than our break even amount of fold equity. In GTO, your opponent doesn't meet the trashy term of MDF, the minimum defense frequency, unless ranges are equal or unless he's in a kind of advantageous situation. When he's in a really disadvantageous world, he's supposed to be folding more than that break-even point, especially when the run-out is really good for the guy that called the flop. The 4 hits, the 3 of diamonds comes, the straight gets there. A lot of things here are good for big blind on this run-out, so that paired with the action sequence makes this fold equity very high, and therefore when we check, we accept an EV of 0, whereas when we bet, we have an EV of like maybe 22% pop. So we are throwing away about 22% pot. I'm just picking numbers here out of the sky, but that would be my guess, something like that. And this is a travesty. Villain should be betting turn very often here, by the way, and probably betting river with this hand pretty much always, I think. Maybe not with the king. Actually, yeah, I'm not sure, but I think this hand is kind of dicey by him. But yeah, we've gone really astray here. So fix this. Let's get this fixed. You can, like, if you want to win at this game, we get this red line fixed. We get it going upwards. Don't just stop at finding theoretical bluffs. You need to do that. That's, poker 101. Got to find those. But secondly, you've got to find some exploitative attacking lines like raising flop. This is a hand we should never be losing. Never. Okay. Cool. See you guys for the next episode where we're going to do a little bit of a more personal take. We're going to have a kind of chatty interview format. We're going to get up close and personal with Mark and find out more about who is this hero that you guys are so emphatically following in From Losing to Cruising. Join us next time for that. Bye for now.
Bye for now.